Hello, it's Duncan Nisbet, the Roving Reporter, here with Angie, Doyle and Mark Pearl. How's it going, guys?
Hi.
Yeah, very good.
Good. So you're having some exciting weather conditions over there, Mark, I believe.
Yeah, we've just had our first proper thunderstorm for the year, and some good lightning going over as well.
Fantastic. So if we lose you, we know what it is, right?
Yeah, we'll blame it on the weather.
Fantastic. And how's the weather where you are, Angie?
It's about the same. I'm not too far away from Mark, but I think the storm's actually blown over Johannesburg because I'm in the CBD, so I think it's headed out to his side.
Right.
I'm
okay.
good.
Cool. So we'll go as long as we can. Fantastic. Right. So obviously you guys are presenting at Let's Test in South Africa, which is awesome. So I just want to talk to you to try and get a feel about who you guys are, a bit of the background, and then we'll talk a bit about your session, and then anything else you'd like to talk about. So start off with, who are you and how do you end up coming to work together?
Do you want to go first, Mark?
Sure, I can introduce myself. So my day-to-day job changes every couple of months. I currently work as a software developer in a dev team for a company called Driven Alliance. I've been with Driven Alliance for almost 5 years now, in a range of roles from, I think I started off at Driven the first 2 weeks as a Scrum Master, and then we decided we weren't going to do Scrum, and realized that we'd have to figure it out from there. So I've done a lot of coaching, a lot of organizational and team coaching, but at a technical level. So we'll look at the process stuff, but we'll also look at, is this team writing good code? Are they using good practices? How can we make them be more effective? So that's what I do in my day-to-day job.
Okay.
What was the second part of the question, Duncan?
How you two came together. Do you want to have a stab first and see how it marries up to Angie's answer?
So I've associated with Angie for a while now. We originally met each other through the Scrum user group of South Africa. We were both organizers on the Joburg part of that user group.
Right.
But I think we really started to get talking when I read Jeff Patton's book on story mapping.
Right.
And I knew that Angie had a very strong business analysis background, but was playing in the agile space. And story mapping absolutely fascinated me. I'd been trying to use user stories for a couple of years and was getting frustrated on a couple of aspects, and story mapping filled a lot of gaps, and Angie knew a lot about story mapping. So that's where it started getting serious. Is that good enough, Angie?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I seem to remember we sort of connected over the user story mapping because you tweeted something about Jeff Patton's book that you just read, and I think we were at a conference and we sort of connected on that a bit later. So, I mean, it was definitely through, the Suksa channels and then, following the tweets. And, I think out of, many people in South Africa, Mark was one of the only people that actually knew what user story mapping was at that time. So it was great to kind of find like a kindred spirit. And then we just kind of progressed conversations, I think, further until we came up with the idea of, maybe trying to introduce it to the broader South African audience, because it's definitely not very well used in South Africa. So, that's kind of where the idea came from.
Sorry, very well used or very broadly used?
It's not well used. So I don't think it's well used, and it's not broadly used either. So I mean, I've seen people's versions of user story mapping, and I mean, there's definite. I mean, I think there's always room for improvement on everything. And it definitely, I mean, from what I've seen, it's not well done, and it's not extensively done. So yeah.
So you still end up with the epic wall of death. Just all
pretty
the
much
story.
like user story hell, where it's all there and you have no idea how it all kind of ties together. No. So
there it is. It's all mapped out. There you go. User story mapped. Done.
There you go.
Easy peasy. Quality. And then, so what's your background, Angie?
So Mark briefly touched on it. I come from a business analysis background.
Yeah.
I've been a business analyst for the past 14 years. I've worked with financial institutions for almost 20. So yeah, it kind of moved from traditional business analysis, and I started getting more and more involved in agile projects. And eventually, I just started loving agile more than anything else, and I actually moved into agile consulting full time only a couple of years ago. So.
Okay.
I currently focus on agile product ownership and business analysis. We've put together a course to kind of help, new BAs and new product owners, ease them in gradually into agile. And coming from a very traditional background myself, at least I can relate. So, yeah, that's pretty much me in a nutshell, I suppose.
That's cool. So you know the pain points from the traditional way, and you can kind of map those to the kind of the agile way.
Yeah, I think maybe a big driver for me to actually move more into the training and consulting side was I found business analysis was really overlooked. So, I'd engaged with a lot of, agile consultants and coaches, and they really didn't get the business analysis function in a team. So it was kind of like motivation for me to say, well, I know this can be done better, and I think I hope I can make a difference here. So that really kind of prompted me to sort of just move out of being a BA on a team to kind of trying to help others. So
I think that's a large problem of why we have that water scrum full, don't we? You have the development guys doing their scrum and being iterative, but before that you have this massive waterfall process, and afterwards you have the waterfall process of getting stuff out the door.
And I think you're right, because I think a lot of people don't understand what analysis is about. So when they try and explain Scrum, they meet that resistance from traditional BAs, and they can't talk to them, from where they're coming from, on the level of business analysis. And I mean, I've seen it as being quite a big problem. So yeah.
Cool. We've lost Mark, so we need to get him back.
Okay.
How do I get him back? Storm. Let's move a ship up. So while he's coming back to us, do you want to talk a bit about how you came to be at Let's Test? So user story mapping, what place does that have in a testing conference?
So I must be honest. I mean, Mark knows more about Let's Test than I do. He was part of tasting Let's Test last year.
Yeah.
I only heard about Let's Test this year. I know about one of the local conference organizers through, someone on the SUGSA committee as well, and Louise is also presented at SUGSA. So I heard about it. I didn't know much about it, but from Mark's perspective, working a lot more with developers and with testers, he definitely saw some value in presenting something like this at a Let's Test workshop, and I definitely can see the value myself. Again, from a testing side, I think it's also, something where we see that they're not always brought on board, with the team. So, I mean, I tend to work a lot with testers myself, because I find that analysis function and the testing function really, that they really do kind of enhance each other if you do it well. So I was really excited, but I must be honest, it was very much Mark driving it. So he, when he gets back, he can maybe kind of, present his motivations behind it. But I mean, it's really exciting. Like I said, I didn't actually know about it until he had sort of mentioned it, until I saw Louise at a SUGSA event recently. So
cool. And like perfect Google Hangout God has stepped in. He's back.
Oh, great. Okay.
so we're just asking the question. How does a user story mapping session come to be at a testing conference? And so Angie said that you might have an answer.
Well, it depends what testing conference you're going to. I've had varied experiences with testers, or the title tester, and Let's Test or Taste Let's Test was around last year in South Africa, and I attended it there. It was a one-day event, and the concept of having testers that really want to understand the problem that they're testing.
Yeah.
It sounds really obvious, and we have a lot of people, or a lot of testers in South Africa that are being inhibited from doing that. So So I see story mapping as a great leveling tool in a team or with a bunch of teams trying to develop a common product. There needs to be a common understanding. And story mapping fills that gap for me. It gives everybody a high-level overview of what is the problem we're trying to solve and how should it work. And that makes it a lot easier to get people with a testing mindset involved very early up at the beginning of whatever you're doing, and to get them involved all the way through. So I think story mapping helps a lot, especially for in South Africa where we've seen this rise of the agile beast and this push of you will now develop software in this manner, and people aren't really sure what they should or shouldn't be doing. So user stories are very common, but user stories have limitations to them. You often don't see the bigger picture when you have a single product backlog and things are organized in order. And user story mapping for me fills that gap. So it makes it easier for everyone to talk and understand, especially from a testing background.
Yeah, I mean, certainly for me, it's really frustrating not being involved in like the requirements conversation, and all of a sudden you just get handed this thing, and they're like, yeah, there you go, test it, and you just don't understand the why or the intent behind it. And so getting involved in those early conversations, okay, right, this is the capability we want, this is the problem it's going to solve, and then just thrashing it out, and that initial kickoff is just so beneficial, isn't it? The amount of times I see work being handed off to people and they're just doing it to the best of their abilities, and then what comes out the other end isn't what was desired. It's really frustrating. So yeah, so I do see a point in user story mapping.
So one of the other talks that's happening at Let's Test is the one done by Oz and Yanku, called A Test and Developer Story. Now, I've worked with Yanku and Oz for a couple of years, and seeing how Oz, who has the title tester in the team, but his involvement in the development of the systems that we work on, it is very, very different to how I've seen traditional testers get involved. Normally, traditional testers, they often only get to see the spec when the developers have said, right, we finished, now you need to make sure we've done it right. Whereas what I like to see is I like to see that that initial involvement. So I don't call Oz a tester, I call him a developer, because he's fundamentally involved in developing a product, and he's coming in with a testing mindset.
Completely agree. It's kind of the shift towards testing as an activity. In the global sense of word, testing. And there are other people doing testing, and the testers now are the expert, for want of a better word. But anyone on the team can do a certain level of testing.
So my experience is some people are better at testing than others. So they have that mindset. And I think the word testing has developed over the last couple of years as I've started to get more involved in the testing community and seen how different people tackle this testing role right now.
So for me, I'm trying to shift mentality away from being beside the conveyor belt and waiting for your bit of the product to come along and for you to stick your bit on, and actually trying to persuade people to jump on the conveyor belt with everyone else and join along the whole journey as it's going. So and that involves getting involved in the requirements gathering. That involves testing wherever you can, in what environment you can, and also making sure that once the thing's gone out into production, it does what you expected it to.
So
not just forgetting about it.
So one thing that really added value to what we were doing was on some of the user stories, this is before I was even introduced to the concept of story mapping, was establishing what are the acceptance criteria before we actually start the work.
Yeah.
And to establish the acceptance criteria, you've got to ask, well, who's going to test this and what's important to them? So it immediately involves having that conversation with whoever's got that testing mindset, and that's fundamentally changed the quality of software that we produce, because we know what needs to be done for it to be usable. I've developed software for many years where that wasn't the case. We kind of discovered it at the very end of the process.
Yeah, it's the critical thinking, isn't it? It's just helping to question the product in the business stakeholder's mind before any code gets written or kind of anything gets too far down the line.
And sometimes asking those questions makes you fundamentally re-ask, do we need to be solving this problem in the first place?
Yeah.
Because often you get thrown problems to solve, and then only at the end, once you've invested a lot of time and money into solving the problem, to realize, well, actually, this wasn't a problem.
Yeah.
And we don't need to spend time on this. So,
or you get given the wrong problem.
Yes, exactly.
Or the solution to the wrong problem, and you go away and you implement the solution, and it's the wrong problem.
So this is why story mapping is so powerful, because so and I don't want this session to be about agile, but a lot of the agile practices, or kind of the comments in the agile world is, well, because we can't understand the problem right, let's develop something and get feedback, and then we can move from that base to then know what problem we're actually solving. Whereas I look at story mapping as a really effective way of developing software without actually having to write code, because the customer and everybody can look at it and understand, does this problem make sense? So in a very low-hanging way, you can establish what is the problem that we're solving, and get there without even having to do that first iteration.
So learning as we emerge, yeah. So lots of notifications going on as we get Angie back. Hey, Angie.
I'm back. I'm sorry.
I like it. It's great. It's like a game show. Cool. Yeah. So we were just talking about the advantages of the user story mapping and kind of getting an idea of the product before any development gets in place. Was that right, Mark?
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think, what I think I found when I first moved into agile teams is there was very much just a brainstorming activity happening on what features need to go and what user stories need to go on. Whereas user story mapping it really gives you that view of your product before you've actually started building something, which is really valuable because you can have those important discussions, right at the start, rather than, starting to have, fights later on, because that's what used to happen. I'd rather bring them really early into the conversation, and I found it's helped to definitely produce better quality product backlogs. I always found that they were a little bit wishy-washy, and they didn't actually give me a clear understanding of what was coming and what I needed to actually start working on, whereas the user story mapping definitely helped with that and gave that end-to-end view. Without going into an excessive amount of detail that a spec would have.
Do you think the user story mapping helps build trust, because it's a tool that people can question the cards rather than question people, and because people hold their ideas as themselves, don't they? So they think that when their ideas are being challenged, they're being challenged. Do you think user story mapping allows people to challenge the cards?
So
it's kind of indirect questioning.
Yes. So kind of. The motto that we use in the team I'm in right now is we stand side by side looking at the problem we're going to be solving. So instead of attacking the person, we're in this together. So if somebody can bring out, oh, this doesn't make sense, it's not an attack on me as a software developer or on an analyst or something. we are solving this problem together. And I think that's a really important mindset. Is we're viewing a problem, we're not attacking the person.
Yeah.
And I think definitely part of having, seeing that problem is putting it up on a wall so you can actually see it together. Because when people do hold on to information and it's not very clearly visible to everybody else, it makes it really hard to try to figure out what's going on in their mind. Whereas if it's up on a wall, it is very clear, and then it's easier to kind of understand where the points of view that somebody's putting forward or where they're coming from, because it's visual.
Yeah.
So I mean, for me, that's I'm quite a visual person, so I like having a problem up on a wall because it's one step towards actually trying to figure out how we're going to tackle it.
Yeah,
and another benefit you get from that is you get the limitations of the size of the wall.
Definitely.
Yeah.
You can't go into too much detail.
It makes it very clear how big this problem is that we're solving, and can we actually solve it.
I was in a workshop once, a user story mapping workshop, where one guy suggested. So they said, "Well, what happens if your office isn't very big? How do you fit the map up on the wall?" And the response was, "Move to a bigger office." It's like, really? Okay, that's one solution. But yeah, the problem's too big. Let's move offices. Quality. Okay, so the session you're doing at Let's Test. I believe you just done it at the Scrum user group. Have you got any kind of lessons learned that you're taking from that user group to Let's Test? Or was it too soon?
No, I think we've definitely identified some areas, where we can improve. It's the first time Mark and I have actually done a workshop together. So
cool.
And we're quite happy with how it went. And there's always areas for improvement. So I think in terms of maybe positioning user story mapping, we can probably do a little bit more work there, because we do go quite a bit up front into what do you need to have ready before you can start. You have to have a bit of an understanding, about what problem you're trying to tackle. So we'll probably go into a little bit more